Welcome everyone to the Healing Place podcast. I am your host, Teri Wellbrock. Excited to have you here with us, listening in, and also excited to have another wonderful guest. I will be doing some introductions in just a moment, but just wanted to welcome you here first to this space filled with motivation and inspiration and healing stories. Hi, welcome everyone to the Healing Place podcast. So today I am super excited to have with me Kristina Bechtel, who is a social worker in the Wisconsin area. So welcome, Kristina.
Hi, thank you.
I'm very excited to have you here with me. So tell me what it is that you do in your field.
Yeah, so I work for La Crosse County. I work for a program called the Comprehensive Community Services Program. My role is to work with individuals who have been diagnosed with a mental health disability, and then I work with them to, identify, certain goals that they may have in their life, whether that's employment or housing or getting counseling, and then I get them connected to different resources within the La Crosse community that will help them to reach those goals. So I do that. I've been doing social work since I graduated in 2014. I think I've actually kind of been doing social work since about 2011. That's when I started working with the homeless population, and then graduated with a double major in social work and American Indian Studies, and then just right away started working with clients, and then just a little under 2 years ago I started at La Crosse County. So it's pretty much been the homeless and mental health populations. But what I've kind of been working on in the last couple of years is really trying to, perfect my social work practice by being as mindful of the experiences that my clients have been through that has kind of led them to the position that they're in now. And one of the things that I've come across is trauma-informed care. So I've really been trying to not only practice trauma-informed care within my own social work practice, but also share my experience with other social workers and other helping professions, because it's not just social workers. There's so many people out there who work with clients, whether you're a peer support specialist or you're a case manager, a housing case manager. So I really have just been trying to reach out to as many people that will listen to me about my experience, and then what I'm doing to try to promote trauma-informed care within the social work field.
Yeah, and what you just said is so important and so critical to know that it's not just about trauma-informed care. Isn't just about within a mental health setting, because one of the things that I've talked about is I went to a trip or a speaking in a writing seminar down in Orlando, and when I had called about getting a room, the person who had answered the phone originally had said to me, well, because I asked how tall is the building, and they said 6 floors. Well, I have one of my triggers is heights for my trauma history, and so I said, ooh, is there any way I can request a lower floor? And the girl who was on the phone said, well, I'll put it in the notes, and, when you get there, if they have a room available. And I thought, well, if they don't have a room available, I'll end up sleeping in the lobby because I'm not going to be able to go up and down those elevators and blah, blah, blah. So I just sent off an email and said, hey, here's my story, here's my history, here's my needs. To the management at that particular resort. And the response I received was so amazing and so beautiful and so trauma-informed. They went ahead and reserved my room ahead of time. And it was just a beautiful thing to witness. And I thought, oh my gosh, if only the whole world could respond in this way. To be cognizant of, what you just said, a person's history, where they've come from, where they are currently. I know one of the things I had read on your bio was, you're working with addictions. Well, there's such a social stigma with addictions, but what's that person's history? What led them to this place? in where they are. So yeah, very cool that you're out there
Absolutely.
spreading
And
that
that's,
word.
yeah, I mean, that's actually one of my biggest talking points is that, it's all well and good to use trauma-informed care when you're at work working with your clients. But really, trauma-informed care is actually something that should be universally practiced. Even, when you're going to the grocery store and you're talking to a cashier or your neighbor or your mailman or anybody in your life that could potentially have trauma and you don't know that. You don't know what their history is because they're a stranger, but you could inadvertently do something or say something that could potentially trigger their trauma. And so it's important that you really kind of approach like your whole life, your whole social experience, that this person could potentially have trauma. So I'm really going to think about what I say before I say it. Is it kind? Is it thoughtful? Is it, it's so easy to be nice to people. You know what I mean?
Yes,
It's just,
right.
I know it doesn't always seem that way, but you don't know if the reason that the, cashier at McDonald's that's, giving you the stink eye and you are just thinking about what a, horrible person they are and why are they even in this service if they don't want to talk to human beings. But really, there might be something behind that. They might be having a lot of anxiety because of something that happened in their past and they just got triggered and you don't know that. And if you get angry with them and maybe you start yelling at them, then you're actually making things even worse for them. So, it's important that you really approach a universal, universally with everybody, that you practice trauma-informed care.
Yes.
It's not just something you do at work. It's not just something you do at school with your students if you're a teacher. It's something that you should practice every single day, anytime you come into interactions with
Sure.
anybody.
Yeah, it's just like how we should live. Is
Absolutely.
respecting people's story and respecting their truths. So yeah, I love that. Beautiful. So why are you so passionate about this subject? What is it about it that has fired you up?
Yeah. So that actually kind of starts from childhood for me. I grew up in a family that was not so nice. They were they were just very mean-spirited people. I kind of tell people that I came out of the womb with my arms open, ready to love everybody and just wanting everybody to love me. I mean, from my earliest memory, all I can think is that I just wanted to have fun and laugh, and I wanted everybody to love everybody. And the people that my biological parents and my siblings were the polar opposite. They were just kind of mean-spirited. They liked to play jokes on people that left somebody feeling really negative about themselves. And there was a lot of internally within the family, there was a lot of physical abuse. There was a lot of emotional abuse. And basically for the first 7 years of my life, I really just had a difficult time. I kind of spent a large portion of my childhood living in the bathroom because when I was a very little girl, my parents never potty trained me, so I wet the bed a lot. And so their response to that, as opposed to teaching me the right way to go to the bathroom, was, well, then you just get to sleep in the bathroom from now on.
Oh
And,
my goodness.
then after that, everything became, my life was that bathroom. I slept in that bathroom. I stayed in there day after day. We were a very poor family, so there wasn't a lot of food. So if, one kid was going to go without food, it was going to be me, and I really think now that I've had a lot of counseling and time to process about why that happened, I think what I've come to the conclusion of is that it was so evident that I was not supposed to be a part of that family. I was nothing like them. They were all very much on the same page about how to treat others, and I was in a completely different ball field. And I think that really came out whenever they had to interact with me. So it wasn't until I was 7 that the physical abuse became so bad that, social workers and counselors really started to pay attention, and I was removed from the home. I was in and out of foster families pretty much the majority of my childhood, and then finally, at the age of 8, I was adopted to a family who was perfect. I mean, they were funny, they were loving, they were good people, they were just, I like to tell people really what happened is that I was given a second chance at a childhood. Like there were so many people out there, so many adults and teenagers and children who weren't given the opportunity I had to get out, and they, were forced to live in those unhealthy homes their entire life. And then, continue to have to deal with that, those people in their lives. I was fortunate enough to get out, and I ended up having the opportunity to move forward with my life and have a real childhood filled with laughter and love and playful, and, had an opportunity at getting an education. And I just kind of took all of the bad feelings from my childhood, and I just kind of buried it because I didn't want to deal with it. As far as I was concerned, I had gotten out. Why dwell on it? And that worked for me for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, a lot of that trauma started to come up. There was a lot of triggering. I started, when I reached my teen years, 17, 18, I started having a lot of bad feelings, a lot of feelings of unsafety, stuff like that. And so my response to that was to, again, bury it down with things like alcohol and drugs and, not talking about it, dealing with it, unhealthily by, self-harm and stuff like that. And then, I probably wasn't until I was about 24, 25 that I'm like, okay, well, this isn't working because here I'm still unhappy, but now I have all of these, bad decisions I've made that have now developed into barriers for, future career options. So, for example, I got 2 OWIs in less than a month. Because, again, my response to stressful situations was not to actually handle it, it was to just drink. And I didn't realize that those stressful situations were brought on by the trauma that I had not talked about. It wasn't a normal thing for me. It was just bury everything and move on. So these were barriers that I have to overcome now because of these bad decisions I made in dealing with my trauma. After I graduated, I guess I should say, I did eventually go to counseling. I did eventually do it the right way, and I was able to work through a lot of what happened to me in my past. I was able to put things into perspective, and, I was really doing a lot better. I ended up going to college, getting my 4-year degree, started working in the homeless field, figured out where my passion was, and then I started working for this organization called WESCAP, just a tiny nonprofit organization, and it was my job to, first I worked with the Permanent Supportive Housing Program, being the case manager for chronically homeless individuals who had been diagnosed with a mental health disability, and eventually I changed programs from the Permanent Supportive Housing to the SOAR program, where I helped individuals, who were homeless and diagnosed with mental health disabilities apply for Social Security benefits. And I kind of had a lot of time. I mean, it was a good program, and I was busy, but I still had a lot of time to fill in. So my supervisor just, sent me an email one day and said, hey, we've decided that we want to make WESCAP a trauma-informed agency, and we would like you to work with, me and then my other supervisor in finding out what we need to do to become trauma-informed. And one of the things that we learned we need to do was to attend trauma-informed care trainings. And so I started attending it. I really didn't know what to expect. But then all of a sudden, as I'm going to these trainings and all this stuff, I'm learning so much about me. I'm learning so much about my trauma and what I went through and how the decisions I made in my life were a result of that trauma. And then it really put things into perspective for me with my own clients. I was starting to see certain things they were saying or doing, and I was like, right, because of this trauma you faced. And it's really like you can't understand why someone is where they are unless you understand where they came from.
Yes.
And that's exactly what I was learning.
Yes.
And once I, started learning more about trauma-informed care, I just kind of took off with it. I started immediately incorporating it into my own social work with clients and noticing the difference of how they responded to me and notice the difference in their motivation and, how I talk to them and how that really worked, as opposed to, getting frustrated with somebody because of something they said or a reaction they had. I understood why that reaction was happening, so then I was able to adjust my approach to them, which really made just everything better for both them and me, a lot more effective. So then after that, I decided, well, I feel like everybody needs to know this. So I just kind of started putting my workshop proposals out there, and I started to train other people in what I had learned through the WESCAP trainings that I had helped create. And it's so empowering to see. It's just the idea that these social workers and peer support specialists and anybody in the helping profession can just learn that there's so much hidden underneath. A lot of people, if it's not, and I too was guilty of this in my early social work years, if it's not a physical disability, if you can't visibly see the disability, it's hard to remember that there is one under there. And PTSD can be such a real disability. A lot of times, if you see somebody who's been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, that person likely experienced a lot of trauma in their life.
Right.
So if you can have that view of it, it really will go a long way to improving your interactions with your clients.
Yes, well, and I have a diagnosis of CPTSD, and I tell you what, I went through EMDR therapy. And what a life-altering experience that was. I mean, that shifted everything. But the thing that I really found interesting that you talked about, when it's amazing when God or the universe, however you want to look at it, holds up this mirror to you, because I started working in the mental health field with kids. And these were kids in a school setting, elementary age, and trauma-informed care was just starting to come onto the scene, and so I was starting to have more exposure to, doing continuing education and that kind of stuff, and it kept surfacing, and I was just, all of a sudden, I was just amazed, because here I was working with these kids in a mental health capacity, and recognizing things in them about myself. And it was soon after that I started the EMDR therapy, and it really was amazing, like how I was able to relate to myself through recognizing these things once I started to tap into, being aware of history, I guess, is the best way to put it. So yeah, very cool. Yeah. So if you could reach as many people in the world with your message, if you could take it global, your workshops and so forth, who do you want your target audience to be?
I really think everyone, because even if you're not in a helping profession, I mean, you could be doing anything. You could be in construction work. You could be an IT guy. You could be, again, working at a grocery store. It really doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your profession is. Trauma-informed care is something that can be used by anyone to anyone. It's you just don't know. So if you remember, I talked earlier about how in dealing with my trauma, I did some self-harm. You kind of play with, well, what's going to make me feel better, sure, before you figure out what really is going to help you, which, could be anything from medication to therapy to talking it out with friends, processing it. But in the meantime, you're trying to figure out, you're making the poor decisions that, you're discovering aren't working. But so I tried the whole self-harm thing, and I have these scars on my arm because of it, and these scars have always been a source of shame for me. Just the idea that I thought that could work, and every time I see it, I kind of am just wishing I hadn't done it. Now I understand why I did it, and now I don't look at it with shame because I understand. But for a lot of years, I really struggled with it, and I had a situation quite a few years ago I had a coworker of mine who was also, a case manager, and this woman is absolutely amazing. She's one of the best social workers I've ever met. Her ability to show compassion and empathy to her clients is just astounding, and she is somebody that I always think about when I'm working with my clients. Just I kind of try to tap into, how she was with them, and even outside of social work, she is such a fun, wonderful person. We were outside, we were taking a break one day, and we were just kind of, talking and laughing and having a good time, and all of a sudden she sees my arm, and she says, "Oh, you're not one of those idiots who did that to yourself, are you?"
Oh,
and I
no.
was so taken aback. It was I've had people before make comments about it, but nothing like that. Nothing where I had been accused of being an idiot. And so I immediately told her that it was an accident from when I worked at the pizza place, and it was from the oven. And of course I lied about it, because how do you then
Right.
respond with, "Yep, I sure am." You know what I mean? Now, if this person had known about my trauma history, if she had known about my childhood, there's no way she would have ever asked it like that. I know this woman. She would have never said something like that. But I don't go around introducing myself like, "Hey, I'm Kristina Bechtel. By the way, I had this horrific childhood." You know what I mean?
Right.
So how could she have known that? But that's the thing, is that you don't know. You never know who you could be talking to that has a history, and you say something that you think is completely innocent that actually is really triggering. So, my message needs to go out to everyone. You don't know who you could be coming into contact with that may have trauma that could be triggered. So just practice safety precautions. Just
Sure.
have universal trauma-informed care for everybody you come into contact with.
Wow. Well, I am so sorry that happened to you. And yes, what a beautiful message to put out there, because it is so very true that we just don't know. We just don't know anyone's history. Again, I've had people say to me, my nickname is Glitter Shitter, and they'll hear my story and go, "Oh my God!" Like, you don't. You're always smiling and you're always so happy. Because you're right. I don't introduce myself. "Hi, Teri Wellbrock," and here's my horrific history.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. But the beauty of that also is, thank God you were a strong enough person and you already knew, you had learned a lot on your journey. But imagine if you hadn't been,
Mm-hmm.
and she said something like that to someone who wasn't as informed as you are, and trauma sensitive. So, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
powerful. Any myths or facts that you want to clarify for listeners regarding any of these subjects?
I guess what I would say is, trauma is different for everyone. Not everybody who's experienced trauma is going to have, these, not everybody that has trauma is going to deal with it negatively. They're not going to make the same decisions I made where they use alcohol to suppress their pain. If you were to find out that somebody had trauma, don't assume that their life is a shit show. Sorry.
Right. No.
Because it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
Trauma
Right.
is universal. It can happen to anyone. It can be anything from, my situation where it was, happened from early childhood. It could be somebody who gets into a car accident. It could be a natural disaster. It could be historical trauma. Like, there are so many different forms of trauma that one can have, but we all deal with it differently. So really keep in mind that, it's not cookie cutter. There's
Right.
so many different kinds of trauma, and there's so many different ways of approaching. But again, just want to stress it, universal precautions. You just,
Yes.
the best approach is just, it could be really bad, so let's not test the waters.
Right. Right.
Um,
One.
Other myths, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, one of the reasons I ended up getting my degree in psychology, and one of the reasons was my mom had been through two bank robberies, one of which a gun was held to her head, and then I went through two bank robberies. She had been in banking, I went into banking, and a gun was held to my head in one of the robberies, and then one of my coworkers was murdered. But I was fascinated by the fact that I crumbled. I started to have severe panic attacks. I started to have anxiety. I became agoraphobic. Like I completely fell apart. But my mom was just like, it was all about God and all about Jesus and all about faith and all about, and I thought, God, why did I fall? And so I was fascinated, and now I've come to realize that, my mom's history of growing up, she did not experience nearly what I had experienced, but she also had, she just handled things in a different way based upon her history, her, chemical makeup, her personality than I did. And so that was another one of those, learning things as I write my book and I talk about it, that we don't, just because two people might go through the exact same experience, one may seem like they're handling it okay, but the other one may be crumbling. Well, the one who's crumbling may then learn how to process it, get through it, and be okay. Well, the one who seems like they're handling it may be suffering horribly because, like you said, they keep burying it down, and eventually it's going to come to the surface. Eventually it's going to explode. Or they did process it. They were able to process it, and they are okay. So we just don't know. We just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you were going to say, were there any other myths or facts to clarify?
I'm just looking over my notes.
Oh,
No,
that's okay.
I don't think so. It's just, it's universal. It happens regardless of age. It doesn't discriminate. Trauma can happen to anyone. And, like I said, not everybody reacts the same way. I know in my case, I know some social workers who work in CPS who kind of had similar childhoods that I do, and they grew up with this passion to help kids, so nothing like that ever happens to them again. They ran towards what their trauma was. They ran towards it, whereas I know that if I were to work in CPS, there's no way that I could be partial. I mean, I know that would be way too difficult for me because I think I would probably see myself in every kid, and maybe that's not there. So, it affects everybody differently. So it's important to remember that.
That is so very true. I was going to get my PhD in child psychology, and then I was at the University of Cincinnati, and I took a child abuse course. Oh my goodness gracious. I cried and cried. I cried during class. I cried doing homework. I cried. I barely made it through that class. And then I just made a left turn and said, oh, hell no. There's no way I can go into... Now, I did eventually end up working, with kiddos in a mental health agency. And then I ended up leaving that. It was so overwhelming for me emotionally. Again, I would be driving home from work, from a day with a kiddo, and I'd call my own kids who were, early 20s, late teens, and be like, oh my God, crying to them, and they'd be like, Mom, it's okay, because I would just be so overwhelmed with emotion about it. I knew myself well enough, but I find it fascinating. Oh, don't you find it so, fascinating and cool that so many of us who had trauma history as children end up in the helping professions and end up saying, we are going to work with people, whether it's children or adults or addictions or whatever it is, that we're going to do whatever we can to help them not have to hurt like we did. I just find it, how many people in the helping profession that I worked with personally, or that I know that still work in the helping professions, have trauma history. It's just fascinating to me. So,
and I think that it can be helpful. I do think people that have had trauma experiences themselves, that it can help them with their interactions with clients. But I mean, that in no way means that if you don't have trauma that you wouldn't make a good social worker,
sure,
or any, like I said, any helping profession. So I think that actually is another myth that I would probably say is, like, just because one doesn't have trauma doesn't mean that they can't do the job. So I mean, you can you
Because
can be
people,
just as good.
right? People, I mean, people are empathic or compassionate souls by nature, whether they've been, through trauma or not, and
Hmm.
certainly are going to be very gifted in what they can offer to clients. Yeah, I agree with that.
Right,
Yep.
right. Yep.
Yes, ma'am. So what resources have you utilized? You talked about how you learned so much as you created the program and went through the program with a coworker. Anything else that you've utilized or come across that has been helpful?
Well, so I'm in Wisconsin, so I don't know where all the viewers are listening from, but one of my biggest resources that I use is the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, and you can pretty much find a Department of Health Services in any state. So I imagine you would have similar resources, but our director of trauma-informed care in Wisconsin is Scott Webb, and Scott Webb sends out this email almost every week that provides different websites or notices, articles, webinars. I mean, he sends just this list of different resources that you can access that are being, new studies that have come out, stuff like that. And what I did was I just went to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services website and looked under trauma-informed care, and then it gives you the opportunity to subscribe to that newsletter. I would suggest, if you live in Wisconsin, check that out. That is just an amazing plethora of resources. But also, if you live in a different state, try it out too. See what your Department of Health Services has to offer. Otherwise, there are tons of websites out there. Literally, if you just Google trauma-informed care, it'll come up with a ton of resources for you. Somebody that I have listened to multiple times, her name is Toni or Kane, Tonier, and then Kane is spelled Cain. She has just an amazing message to give to people. I would highly suggest looking her up. She has this movie out and this book out called Healing Neen. Healing spelled that way, and then Neen is N-E, and she just has an amazing story that was, what I heard as I was starting my trauma-informed care journey, and has been absolutely life-changing for me. So I would say if you get the chance, look her up because she's absolutely amazing. So
Very cool. I just wrote her name down too, and so I will be looking her up. Ace's connection, where I think we connected, is also reminds me
Yep.
of what you were talking about with Scott Webb, and that I love it that there's so many resources, so many articles, and I mean, it can be scientific, it can be real life, it can be, from a therapist point of view, it can be from a survivor's point of view, just an
Yep.
incredible community around, and now that obviously is ACE's, concentrated as far as, like adverse childhood experiences. But I do think we see on there some trauma-informed care and some trauma beyond just childhood trauma. So, which is cool.
Right.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. My favorite question that I always ask everybody, and I think you and I had messaged back and forth about it. So, if you could meet anyone in the world, dead or alive, who could help you with, your passion and your mission, who would it be?
Okay, so yeah, you're right. I did. I thought a lot about this question. And okay, so I am not like this huge art fan, but I do love Salvador Dali. And part of the reason I love him is because he's a surrealist artist, and he does these pictures where it doesn't matter how many times you look at them, every time you look, you see something else that you didn't notice before. There's one specific one I'm thinking of, swans reflecting elephants. If you get a chance, look at it. It is absolutely amazing. But I think it really, his work, I think, speaks to me the most because I kind of feel the same way. Like, again, you can look at somebody and you can see a lot on the outside, but there's so much going on the inside that you don't know until you maybe get to know that person or talk to them more to realize, wow, there's so much more there than I didn't even realize. So I've decided my answer to that question is Salvador Dali, because I'd really love to ask him, like, what are you thinking in your head?
Yeah, I just pulled it up.
When you are, well, he's passed now, but
yeah,
yeah, if I could,
that's really
I would meet with
cool.
him.
How weird that, I mean, I've never seen this painting before. I just pulled it up. I popped it up on my phone as we're talking, and I was like, oh, I want to look at this. And so,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that is just so beautiful. And I
Yeah.
get what you're saying, that yes, you know, what
Do
you
you
see.
see, what do you see, swans or elephants?
I saw elephants at first, and I had to look for the
Okay, yeah.
swans.
Yep.
And then I was like, oh, there
Yeah,
they
and I'm
are.
sure if you looked, there's some kind of something out there that says what it says about you if you see swans versus the elephants.
Right.
But, I don't care about all that. It's so, his work is such an enigma. I could look at his work all day long.
Oh my gosh.
And I
like
do, because I have some of his stuff in my office. So
yeah, I'm
anytime I need a
fascinated.
break.
Yeah, this is really cool. Well, thanks for introducing me to this. Now I just saw a goat, so who knows what that means. That's so cool. That's awesome. I love this kind of stuff. And I love that poetic, like I get it. There's just a poetry to the art itself. It's not just a piece of art.
Yes.
There's something very
Absolutely.
profound and poetic and beautiful and deep about it. So very cool. Well, thanks for that. Great answer.
Yeah.
All right. Woohoo. All right. Last question. What is your dream job, and are you currently doing it?
Oh, honestly, my dream job is to do trauma-informed care presentations for a career. I would love to go around, nationally, even outside of America, just spreading my message to everyone and kind of like sharing my personal story, explaining how I got to where I am and how, trauma-informed care works. And the thing is that if people could see me even 10 years ago compared to where I am now, there is nothing else. You can do anything you want to do. I would have never 10 years ago thought that I was a worker, we're at a county level position, getting the opportunity to share my message with people, in an effort to help, their social work practice and their, working with humans. So I would love to do this for a living. I would love to just do this. I like my job. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
My job is really awesome. I really enjoy my clients. I love my coworkers. I love working at, La Crosse County. It's great. But, my passion really is in training people, is in, sharing my message with others in the hopes that it can change not only their life, but the lives of their clients as well.
Very cool. I, last October, was invited to speak in front of about 250 mental health professionals or social workers, people in the field, at a trauma-informed care conference in northern Kentucky. And I spoke first for about 45 minutes, sharing what I call my story of hope, and it was very powerful and very cool. And the keynote speaker followed me, and I don't know if you've ever looked at her website or anything, but it sounds like something she does what you want to be doing. It's Lisa Ferenz of the Ferenz Institute. It's FERENTZ. She's written a number of books. I just pulled them out and they're on my lap. Ruby Slippers, or Finding Your Ruby Slippers, Transformative Life Lessons from the Therapist's Couch. Then the other one is Treating Self-Destructive Behaviors and Trauma Survivors, a Clinician's Guide. And then finally, Letting Go of Self-Destructive Behaviors, a Workbook of Hope and Healing. So, yeah, very, very cool. She was an incredibly powerful keynote speaker, very knowledgeable, just brilliant, and helped me even understand even more about my journey and kind of like why I did some of the things that I did or am doing. And very cool. And she totally made my day because she just kept walking over to the table and saying, Teri said this and it so applies to this. And so it helped me realize that the message I was sharing was relatable to what the message she was trying to give out there. So they jived well together, and that was really cool. So Lisa Ferenz, if you get a chance, go to the Ferenz Institute. website and check it out and check her out. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for that
Oh,
resource.
absolutely. Well, very cool. Well, it has been wonderful having you on air. Thank you for joining me. Is there, well, one, if there's, do you have a website? Is there any way, if people want to reach out to you or get more information about what it is you do and what you offer in your courses, how they can get a hold of you?
Absolutely. You could just email me at kbechtel, Bechtel is spelled Bechtel, at lacrossecounty.org. And I would love to, any opportunity I get to talk to people again, even if it's just talking, brainstorming resources, if it's, presenting, I would love to do that. I would say just email me. Okay. I do not have any kind of a website, though. I'm not nearly that cool.
Okay. That's so cool. That's good. All right. Well, and anything else that you want to touch on before we close out?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah, it's great. And you had asked about the audience. We're all over the place. As a matter of fact, last time I looked, we had been downloaded in I want to say 12 countries, but I think we jumped up to 13 different countries. So Japan, Australia, Germany. So it's just kind of neat to think, oh my gosh, somebody, on the other side of the world has listened in. So yeah, very cool.
Okay, it's a good thing you didn't tell me that before we started.
Right. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to do a little closeout here. So everyone, thank you for joining us today. And until next time, remember to be gentle with yourselves. Take care.